Just a quick message before this video starts. This is the complete series of I Run a Shop That Buys and Sells Bizarre Items by Mr. Grey 42. I did the first part of this series over 2 months ago and the last part just last week, and I find it really interesting to hear the difference in the audio quality from my original setup that I had in my old office to the setup that I have now in my new office. I'm continually trying to improve the audio quality that I put out, so hopefully it's noticeable. But I do find definitely in this video, once I've put these 5 different parts together, that it was really noticeable in the audio quality and also my style of narration just in that short 2 months and how much that's changed. Anyway, that's enough from me now. On to the story. I run a shop that buys and sells bizarre items. One last thanks to Mr. Grey 42 for reaching out to me to narrate this. It's been a pleasure working with them, and I hope to narrate some of their stories in the near future. I Run a Shop That Buys and Sells Bizarre Items by Mr. Grey 42. The neon sign above my shop reads, Emporium of Ethereal. We, and by we I mean I, make an effort to advertise this establishment as a place where nobody and nothing will be turned away. Just last week, for example, a gentleman brought in the pistol used by John Wilkes Booth to kill President Lincoln. According to him, the embittered soul of Honest Abe himself was attached to it. After performing a certain ritual to test the authenticity of such a claim, I saw the telltale apparition of the tall, bearded commander-in-chief himself, which nearly caused the man to jump out of his skin, partly due to said spectre being considerably irate. It wasn't his spirit, not really. More of an echo, a leftover of Lincoln's spirit. Anyway, having proven its realism, I dismissed the echo and it returned into the weapon. I determined the worth of the object to be 15,500, or any equivalent thereof. He grew irate, saying it was worth at least 30,000, that he could go to the pawn shop in Pulp Fiction and get a better price, that he could get more for the gun at Ed and Lorraine Warren's museum. I acted a bit unprofessional after that last bit, I won't lie. I had to give him a bit of encouragement. Said encouragement came in the form of ringing a bell with a dog symbol on it 3 times. Then, watching him grow pale as a sheet as the 3-headed dog bounded out from the back of the shop and growled at him. Handing the gun over and accepting the money, he fled as quickly as he could. I dismissed the dog, then took the gun and put it in the warehouse. Then you have my more unique clientele. 2 days ago, a huge amorphous blob of eyes and tentacles slithered through my door and dropped a strange device on my counter. Non-Euclidean would be doing it an injustice. Every view I took of it was a different shape. Look at it from the side, it would be spherical. Above, triangular. Below, a cube, and numerous variations thereof. According to the customer, whose name I won't even try to spell, it was an ancestral artifact used to determine the direction one was supposed to go. Said ancestor had used it to find a new world for their people. In short, an otherworldly being brought me an old compass. After examining it, using certain methods that the previous owner told me never to disclose, I determined it to be worth 700 cumulifla, which for them would be what 150,000 is for humans. At this, they excitedly chirped and screeched in gratitude, and eagerly shook my hand with their long, slimy appendage, then apologizing profusely for said slime. Telling them it was no problem, I washed my hands and gave them the money, then Trying to avoid looking at the device too hard, I put it in another part of the warehouse reserved for eldritch items. Now, by this point, you may be wondering, where the hell is this place? Or maybe not. I'm not a mind reader. That's my watch's job. Anyway, it isn't really located in one specific place. It's in a kind of space and time between spaces and time, if you understand me. I've had at least 20 different people bring Just Booth's gun, all authentic, with varying reactions. You can't find it unless you know damn well what you're looking for, and if you call ahead using a specific number, which I can't give out. The shop is on Earth and in the 21st century, but at the same time it isn't. It's complicated, but necessary information, just so you know how I'm posting here. This brings me to the reason why I'm posting here. See, I've been getting threatening phone calls lately. I wouldn't be too unnerved, except the stalker gets a bit too close for comfort. They describe what I'm doing, what I'm eating, what part of the shop I'm in. Standard stalker shtick. Why is this a problem? Put yourself in my shoes. You run a shop in a place that's not supposed to have anyone but you living in it, and you're getting phone calls from someone or something that knows details about your place of business and your location in vivid detail. Then there's what happened last night. I heard a clattering noise from the warehouse, which is accessed through a door marked as such. Quick detail about the warehouse and shop. The shop is relatively tiny, but the warehouse acts as a kind of pocket dimension, allowing for infinite storage. The reason this is important is because last night I saw someone or something casually perusing the WMD hazmat section of the warehouse, looking at our fragment of the elephant's foot as if it were jewellery. "Sorry, bud, but those ain't for sale," I said, the gravity of the situation not sinking in yet. I turned on my flashlight and froze. It looked human, but when I shone a light at it, the thing, whatever the hell it was, seemed to be covered in a glossy black substance. It had no mouth, nose, or pupils. Well, at least it didn't have a mouth until its face opened like a flower, revealing a pinkish, grinning face with long, anglerfish-like teeth and the same eyes. It stood there, body compressing and expanding as it breathed. Then I took a step back. As if to mock me, it took a step forward and stayed there, that grin still plastered on. My eyes darted from the door, then back to it. As wide as the grin was, it seemed to get a bit wider. It knew I was trying to gauge the distance between it and the door. It was daring me to make a run for it. A dare I decided to take. Sprinting for the open door, I heard it screech at me and bounded on all fours. Its fingers were just about to grab me before I re-entered the brightly lit shop, then slammed the door and heard the impact of its body on the door. I stood for a moment, breathing heavily. Then, after about an hour, I reached behind the counter and unlocked a cabinet that held a pistol, only meant to be used for emergencies. Checking and loading it, I slowly undid the barricade and peeked inside. Nothing. No trace of the thing, no residue from whatever substance covered it. Everything was completely normal. I had almost sighed in relief when a panicked jolt shot through me. There was a light knock on the glass door. It was the creature, still grinning at me. It gestured towards the desk where the phone was. It rang, and I cautiously answered. Emporium of the I was just doing a bit of browsing, that's all, the stalker's voice rasped mockingly. then chuckled sadistically. I looked at the door, seeing it was still there, pressed against the glass. No phone in its hand and its mouth unmoving, except to tauntingly open and shut its jaw. "You're quicker than the others, I'll give you that." Its outer face folded back over the true face, concealing its mouth. Then, with no warning, it scampered off, and the line went dead. Needless to say, I didn't get any sleep that night. I stayed up, pistol in my hand, looking back and forth from the warehouse door to the front door. It didn't come back. I don't know what that thing, whatever it was, intended. Whether it really wanted its hands on WMDs or if it was just screwing with me. How it got in, let alone out. I'll need to phone my benefactor, ask them about it. In the meantime, I've got a customer to attend to. Part 2. I mentioned in my last post that I had another customer to attend to. See, before the customer, someone else came in. A man in a black suit walked in, then to my exasperation flashed a badge at me. He said in an overly professional, pompous tone that he was Agent Thomas Moore from some 3-letter company. I don't remember which one, and I don't care to. According to him, we were in possession of certain items of interest to the American nation, and he wished to buy them from me. Now, let me fill you in on something regarding the Emporium. It may have a warehouse containing many strange artifacts, but it isn't Warehouse 13. It isn't government-owned in any capacity. Not only that, but because of its in-between state, it acts as a sort of neutral ground for government, corporate, and military activity, regardless of which world they came from. Essentially, we aren't obligated or even allowed to exchange with any of the 3 above bodies. I explained this to the agent as politely as possible, even showing him written documentation the boss, who I'll call Mr. A from here on out, had given me for just these sorts of incidents. Taking the paper from my hand, he looked over it repeatedly, I guess to try and find some way of proving that it was a forgery. He must have figured out that the paperwork was legitimate, because soon enough he thrust it back to me with a frustrated sneer. The agent made sure to tell me that he would find a way to recover those artifacts, told me I was a traitor to the American nation, called me Edward Snowden II, blah-de-blah. Nothing I haven't heard from suits before. A few hours later, my actual customer, a pale man dressed like royalty or nobility, stood in front of the door. He smiled with impeccably white, sharp teeth as he knocked on the glass. After a moment, he made a motion of clearing his throat, and I immediately remembered my etiquette. Rushing to open the door for my vampiric customer, I apologized for my rudeness, but he just held up a clawed hand and told me it was no problem. Happens all the time. Relieved that I wasn't about to become his next meal, I got back behind the counter and waited to hear if he wanted to buy or sell something. He had come to make a purchase, asking for a certain family heirloom that had apparently been stolen and sold to the Emporium. A sword that could drain the blood of whoever had been cut by it. Asking him to wait a moment, I typed in his name, the details of the product, and stepped back into the warehouse. Shortly thereafter, I gave him the price. 30,000 blood crystals, which are exactly what they sound like. Nodding, he opened an old-fashioned bag, rifled around through it, then produced the proper amount and handed it to me. Smiling affably, well, as affably as you can when you have long, blood-drinking fangs in your mouth, he shook my hand and thanked me. Ignoring the icy cold feel of his hand, I thanked him as well for his patronage. He took the weapon, then after patting Cerberus on his middle head, stepped outside, then vanished into a cloud of smoke. Most vampires are very polite when they visit. The ones that aren't are usually going through something, like blood withdrawal, or else they're just arrogant scumbags. But hey, who am I to judge, right? Some hours and several customers later, Mr. A called. He asked how things had been going. I gave him my report, and he groaned at the mention of Agent Moore.
"Sorry you had to deal with that, lad,"
he said in his elderly Irish accent.
"These fellas don't know how to take a hint."
Tell me about it, I scoffed. Then I remembered about the incident in the warehouse. Hey, Mr. A? There was something in the warehouse last night. Not an apparition. Something got in. Didn't go through the doors. There was silence on the other end. Then, in an uncharacteristically shaky tone, Mr. A said,
Go on.
I described the creature, and he began muttering nervously to himself. He stopped, then cleared his throat. He proceeded to explain that this creature was called the Vagrant. According to him, it had been hounding him for years, giving threatening phone calls, entering the shop through the warehouse despite there being no way of doing so, and killing several previous owners of the shop. He sighed and said that he understood if I wanted to quit, knowing that last bit of information. I was surprised, to be sure, but I told him that I didn't have much to go back on if I did quit. He seemed relieved, but was apologetic all the same for not explaining. He told me that a lot of things were unknown about the Vagrant. Even he didn't know what it was. And after he had first encountered it, he went to them. The beings who granted him this place to make this shop, and demanded an explanation. They were apparently just as confused and unnerved as he was. Now, just let that sink in. Eldritch beings that own a limbo-esque dimension are unaware of a creature able to enter and exit pocket dimensions, and are straight up disturbed by it. As I spoke to Mr. A, I looked at my watch, seeing that the big hand was on 12 and the little hand was on 2. Remember when I said in my last post that I wasn't a mind reader? That's my watch's job? Well, said watch is capable of telling not only if someone I'm speaking to is being honest, but how much so, and if the secret they're keeping is potentially harmful. According to the watch, yes, he was keeping some secrets. But no, they weren't overly harmful. It went back to both hands on midnight when he said he cared about his employees, that we weren't just food for the Vagrant or anything of the sort. Eventually, he told me to keep an eye out, be careful, and let him know if the Vagrant came back or did anything out of the ordinary. And whatever happens, don't let it through the door. Then he hung up. I'm not saying Mr. A isn't a secretive man, but he's proven to be trustworthy over the past few years working for him. And in all that time, he's never shown so much concern in his voice. I can't really be bothered to be suspicious right now, though. I have bigger concerns. About a minute after he hung up, Cerberus growled as the phone rang again. Before I could give my usual greeting, a familiar chuckle came over the speaker. Then a raspy voice said,
"The old man still thinks he can keep me out. Tisk, tisk, tisk. Last night was as close as I've gotten. Never know. I might be able to get closer next time."
Shaking, I slammed the phone on the receiver. It kept ringing, but I refused to answer. A nearby slot began printing out pieces of paper with the transcribed messages of the Vagrant. I'm not about to repeat the things it said, except one. It's nice here, under your bed. Part 3. So, seems the vagrant was bluffing. I kind of figured it was. It's proven to be good at that. When I read the last message, of course I got scared. It's pretty damn easy to get scared of something like this. So, naturally, I got the gun, slowly entered the room provided to me by Mr. A, then entered and looked under the bed, but not before poking underneath with a broom just to make sure. I wasn't leaving my face exposed to a possible attack. As you may have guessed, nothing was there. Sighing in relief, I crept back to the desk. Cerberus hadn't made any noise since growling at the phone, so it seemed like I was in the clear. And yeah, I checked on him. The vagrant hadn't been inside or hurt him. I've noticed a couple of commenters express concern about the little guy. He was pretty touched when I told him that. 3-headed hellhound or not, he's pretty adorable when he's flattered. Anyway, after I'd ejected the round from the gun and put it away safely, I closed up the shop for the night, or what passes for night here, and decided to turn in. The next day, I opened the shop and went about my usual day. At around 10 in the morning, a masked and cloaked man casually placed several boxes and bags at the door before walking away into the mist that surrounds the shop. I nodded at him in thanks just before he left, then brought the groceries in. That was Mr. A's delivery man. Yeah, just because I live in a different dimension and peddle otherworldly goods doesn't mean I don't get hungry. Mr. A always makes sure that the Emporium's kitchen was fully stocked with whatever they wanted or needed, so long as the shopkeeper didn't overeat or neglect their duties. Not only that, but he also includes plenty of spare ammunition for the gun I keep under the desk, the properties of which I should really get around to explaining at some point. A new customer walked, or rather, skittered in at what passes for 2 p.m. here. This one being of the race known as the Primatria. The best way I can describe them is a creature composed of organic machinery crawling on the ground like a spider or lizard towards the counter. The Primatrian raised their round head to greet me using strange beeps and what sounded like dial-up. I was able to translate the request as being, "We wish, want, like to make purchase, acquisition, exchange of for artifact, relic, thing stolen, pilfered from we, our people, tribe, race, species." These folks have trouble with directly communicating with human languages, so the translations tend to come out with multiple related words, hence the translation. This trend may reappear in future entries for other beings with little grasp of human language. After getting a holographic image of what the artifact looked like, I went into the warehouse and took a box with the squirming, squealing machine creature inside. How this was an artifact is beyond me. Anyway, I rang them up, gave them the price for the artifact, and after taking a moment to process the amount, they paid and thanked me, in their own way, and began to exit. Before leaving, though, they told me something pretty worrisome. There were gashes on the outside of the shop, and they recommended that I make repairs as soon as possible. Stepping out afterward, taking the gun, of course, I saw that there were indeed marks on the side of the building. They spelled out the word, "Told you." I knew the culprit. Who else could it be but the vagrant? I was about to re-enter the shop when I saw the customer. Except there was something wrong with them. They were twitching wildly, giving strange beeps and squeals. As if that wasn't bad enough, they quickly stood on 2 legs and faced me. I drew the pistol and aimed it at the Primatrian. The surface of its head began to warp and twist, looking like some kind of grinning mask. An all too familiar chuckle came from it as black slime oozed from its body. Then the machine's face opened up and it dropped the artifact inside, making a show of chewing it. The Primatrian screeched mechanically in what I could only assume to be pain. Its flashing, glowing eye fixed on me as it began speaking in laboured, stuttering beeps. Terminate, kill, release us. It, aberration, wants, hates, you, individual, wants, likes to use, make, control us. Another pain screech, like metal scraping metal, came from it, becoming steadily louder and more agonizing. With reluctance, I pulled the trigger, once, twice, 3 times. Sparks flew from the machine, along with several fluids used for biocomponents, and the black slime on the vagrant's body. Now, I want to say, for the record, I have had to use the gun against especially unruly patrons and a few stubborn suits who stormed the shop wielding their own weapons. This was different though. This was a customer I had finished selling to just a little while ago. I had been talking to them, and now here they were, lying on the ground, dead. What's more, they told me to kill them. I looked up at the writing on the side of the shop, then back at the body. I wouldn't say I felt like crying, but I did feel a profound sense of regret and sympathy for this poor creature. Then I saw the mocking grin its face had been twisted into, and my grief turned to anger. I had to steel myself from further desecrating the Primatrian's corpse with more gunfire. Luckily, fear took control of me before I could make such a rash decision. The Primatrian had seen the vagrant's defacement. They had told me about it. Had the vagrant taken control of the machine before or after the vandalism? Maybe it could read minds too, because I heard a static-filled chuckle coming from the corpse. That confirmed my suspicions. The damn monster had been inside the shop. It hadn't harmed me, but it had forced me to euthanize an innocent, and it had proven to me that it could get in. However, none of these realizations were what sent me running back to the Emporium and frantically calling Mr. A, struggling to explain through panicked breaths. What caused this was the slow, deliberate motion of its arm as it drew 3 words in the ground. Not long now. Part 4 by Mr. Gray 42. Well, things have officially gotten batshit. When I called Mr. A and told him about the vagrant's actions, I could almost hear him go pale. Obviously, he had hoped this would never happen. He told me to say a certain phrase aloud, closed for maintenance. Just like that, the entire shop shifted. The glass door was covered with an enormous slab of some bizarre material that looked almost like obsidian, and come to think of it, it looked an awful lot like a solid form of whatever the vagrant's skin was covered with. The same thing happened to the windows, and the lights in the shop turned on automatically. Finally, the warehouse door was sealed by one of the slabs. There was no doubt in my mind that Mr. A had hoped and prayed this would never happen, but he always expected that it would. Despite his obvious fear, he managed to keep enough composure to tell me that these slabs were created from material taken from one of the vagrant's earlier intrusions. Using it, he had been able to create a full system that would drive the creature out. Then he told me with some hesitation that it was time to meet them. Now, this was the first time that he had decided to give them an actual name. According to him, they were called the Proprietor. Despite their innocent-sounding name, I had the sense that I had to be on my guard when it came to dealing with them, something Mr. A confirmed. "You've dealt with eldritch things before, lad, but trust me when I tell you, this bloke's on a different level. I can't stress these instructions enough, lad. Don't ask them anything. Just listen, then wait until they've finished speaking. They'll know why you're there, and they'll give you answers, but they won't be comforting." Well, I got what Mr. A was talking about after he had given me the instructions on opening a door to the Proprietor's world. I'm not allowed to disclose how I made it appear, but the door that the shop previously didn't have appeared behind me. On it was a sign that read, "Proprietor's Office, Staff Only. Violators will be terminated." A faint droning noise emanated from the other side. Cerberus gave a small whine, and I just pet his head and smiled reassuringly, though I'd be lying if I said I wasn't feeling nervous as well. I slowly placed my hand on the doorknob, then turned and opened it. How do I best describe what I experienced there? I think the best word I can use is contradiction. Imagine an infinitely large room with no colour, yet somehow brighter than the sun. The droning noise I heard from the other side of the door continued, but it was joined by a deafening screech. Then the noise changed to words. I could hear them suddenly speaking in my head. It pierced my mind, speaking in nonsensical phrases that I could somehow comprehend. They had no voice, and every voice. Like I said, contradiction. Bear in mind, the speech of this being is similar in structure to the Primatrian. Same as them, the Proprietor seems to be unable to translate their words into fully comprehensible human language. So this is the best I can do. The following is the best translation I can provide. You, manager, were invited here to understand, know, how to kill, evict, vagrant vandal, and protect investment property shop. We, the Proprietor, know, remember, it vagrant. It vagrant isn't. Vagrant vandal is created from nothing, void. It vagrant isn't happy, angry, hates us, you, everything for existing, being, living. Vagrant vandal wants to deface, break, kill you, us, everything for having form, life. Use fire, gun, tool. Not easy, simple. Gun, tool, useful against living, undead, existent people, folks. Vagrant vandal doesn't exist, live. Kill, break, living physical prison, form jar and put nothing, vagrant, in new prison, form jar. Bring, deliver jar to us, the Proprietor. That is all, thank you, back to work. This is all approximate. I have a clearer picture of what I need to do in my head. So basically, I need to kill the physical form of this thing, then seal it in something that they gave me. It looks like a puzzle box. If Hellraiser comes to mind, I don't blame you. I thought the same. Why they didn't do this for the previous owners is beyond me. I reported back to Mr. A, and he was as surprised as I was. Still, he told me to keep the gun and box close at hand. Strange as the Proprietor was, I found myself trusting it. I had the impression that if it saw me as a tool or puppet, it could have easily taken over my mind, used me to kill the vagrant rather than instructing me how to. I have a feeling that things are really coming to a head soon though. Just 2 hours ago, I got a call. Before I could answer, an enraged voice snarled,
"You spoke to them, didn't you, you little shit? I couldn't sense you for hours. I was starting to think you'd gotten so scared you decided to finish the job yourself. What did they tell you?"
I stayed quiet, instinctively reaching for the gun.
"What did they tell you?"
It demanded again, through clenched teeth, all arrogance and mockery gone. Still, I said nothing. It shrieked,
"Damn it. Tell me or I'm going to carve you into tiny pieces and make your dog fucking eat them."
"You sound scared," I replied coldly and with a hint of mockery of my own. There was silence on the other end. Then my right ear erupted in pain as the vagrant screeched furiously. I dropped the phone and fell, clutching my ear which was ringing with tinnitus. Cerberus rushed to my side and began nudging me. Once the pain began to subside, the sound of high, deranged laughter sounded from the phone's speakers. Then I heard a sound that chilled my blood more than the sadistic creature's laughter, something that made all three of Cerberus's heads begin barking and growling. It was sealed up, but I could hear it all the same. It began knocking from inside the warehouse where I first saw it. All the while, the phone kept broadcasting its laughter. Part 5. Well, that was an experience. After enduring an onslaught of the vagrant's deranged laughter and incessant knocking, I decided that enough was enough. I drew the pistol, bringing several clips with me, as well as grabbing the box and a couple of other things I would need. Before I go any further, it's probably time I explain the properties of this pistol. 1. It's a smart weapon, i.e., its ammo will seek out their target or targets if the user can see them clearly and it can point at targets I've lost track of. 2. Users can change the kind of ammo it fires. If they want hollow points, armor piercing, incendiary, or almost any other kind of bullet. 3. Once it's struck an enemy, it doesn't matter what they are. Angel, demon, vampire, fed. They'll die. The catch is that it forms a kind of bond with the user, and as a consequence, the wielder can sometimes see flashes of the memories of previous people, seeing who they killed, feeling their pain, remorse, or stress. Remember back at the very beginning when Booth's pistol was brought in? That's what I mean. It can be useful to hear from previous shop owners what sorts of trouble they experienced and how to avoid it. The more stressed the user is, the more frequent these visions become, and the more likely it is for the user to experience their negative emotions more intensely, or even forget who they are, having their minds lost amidst an endless sea of echoes. With all that said, I knew I needed to go into that warehouse with my head cool and my conscience clear. Using instructions given to me by Mr. A, I used the other phrase for lockdown procedures. Beginning maintenance. The slab in front of the warehouse door slid away. By this time, the knocking from the vagrant had stopped. I think I'd injured its pride by suggesting that it was afraid, so it wanted me to come in. After hearing whines from Cerberus, I patted him on the middle head, assuring him that I'll be back in a few minutes. Then I opened the door and entered, aiming the gun ahead of me. The warehouse had changed. It wasn't a warehouse any longer. Now it was a strange, infinite void similar to what I witnessed with the proprietor's world. The difference was that this place seemed to be Vantablack, except even that wouldn't be accurate, as I could see in it just fine somehow. Probably the proprietor's work to create a void for the vagrant to enter and be trapped in. And what I saw was disturbing, to say the least. People of many races and species, all standing still, all covered in the same black substance on the vagrant. As I took a good look at them, all of their eyes snapped open and their expressions contorted into unnatural, malicious smiles. Among them, I even saw many creatures identical to the same one I had encountered the first time. The black slime leaked from between their teeth, but there were those who seemed to have less of the slime visible. Past all of them was something that seemed darker than the atmosphere around me, except this was different. I could see it moving, pulsing, and writhing. It was a living darkness, not a mere absence of light. Suddenly, something made sense. The Prometrian had none of the slime on them until I shot them. I had never encountered the vagrant in its true form. I had only encountered its puppets. It had been working on a way to get into the shop in a way that would leave behind little to no trace. They, or rather it, seemed to sense this revelation, because immediately the puppets began to laugh. "What do you think?" one of them said, before another snapped. "Are you scared yet, you little shit?" "Believe it or not," said one of the human vessels, "this body used to belong to the previous owner. Why not just let me in?" This last voice sounded unlike the others, deep, commanding, vicious, and yet at the same time calm, reassuring, and I could hear it in my mind, just like with the proprietor, only it was a lot more painful, like a million tiny drills were burrowing into my skull, directly into my brain. "I just want to reunite with them. They and I have some outstanding business to settle. You needn't be a part of it. All you need to do is allow me access to the shop. Come now, be reasonable." Even as it was saying this, I looked up from where I had fallen due to the pain, and saw its puppets were now crowded around me, beginning to reach for me with black ooze dripping from their fingers. Through the pain, I drew the pistol and fired at the previous shop owner. The rest of the puppets cried out in agony, and the drilling ceased. I stood up, then aimed at the group. By this point, they were beginning to recover from the collective pain, and they glared at me, eyes blazing with hate. I knew that, as useful as the gun was, it wouldn't be enough. Luckily, I had a plan B. I withdrew the bell used for calling Cerberus, then rang it 9 times. The dog bounded into the void room, then as he was running, began to change his size. In 3 seconds, he was at least 7 feet tall, and his 3 heads were snapping and ripping at the puppets. Some of them tried to attack him or infect him, but the black ooze just slid off him, causing him to turn his attention to another. As he did so, I shot several others, some bursting into flames and instantly fading away. Rather anticlimactically, the entire host of puppets was disposed of in less than a minute, and to say the vagrant was displeased was an understatement. I could hear the abomination making strange noises like a hissing screech. It was more comprehensible in my mind yet again, where it was shrieking, "You son of a bitch! You just couldn't!" "Can you just shut the hell up?" I growled, taking out the box. The formless shadow at the end of the room shuddered. "No," it whispered, and then began frantically pleading, No, I can't. Don't put me in a form I can't control. You don't know what it's like to not exist while everything else does. Please, don't. I thought back to the Primatrian, those agonized metallic screeches. I wondered if they had begged in a similar way to leave it alone, to remove its presence from its mechanical body. I began turning the box, prompting a strange light to emit from it. The shifting and shuddering became more violent as I kept twisting. The vagrant, realizing that I wasn't about to bargain with it, began cursing at me in many languages. Then at the end, laughing defiantly. "You think I'm the only one born of the void?" it hissed. "My brethren will know what you've done. I was kind enough to try to snuff out that machine's consciousness, along with the rest of them. The others will make sure you see what they make you do. They—" "Shut up!" I gave the last twist, then the box began moving on its own, absorbing the monstrosity's formless being as it kept laughing in defiance. When it was done, I stood in the warehouse as it reformed around me while I held the box. I then patted Cerberus on one of his heads before he shrunk. Then we re-entered the shop. I obeyed the proprietor's instructions, leaving the box with them. "Well done, good job. We, the proprietor, will keep form, prison, jar of vagrant vandal here. Friends close, enemies closer. That is all. Thank you. Back to work." And so just like that, I was back in business. I know, again, anticlimactic. Still, as scary and dangerous as the vagrant was, it was really little more than a pest or mould infesting the shop. I will say, though, I think things have just begun. I got a call a few hours ago. The only thing I heard on the line was a strange, inhuman voice that sounded similar to the vagrant's. This one sounded a lot angrier, though, if that was even possible. I immediately slammed the phone on its cradle. I don't know what the near future holds in store, no pun intended, for the Emporium and me. But as long as I'm able, I'm going to keep running the place as instructed. This isn't goodbye, just a see you later. Thanks to everyone for reading my accounts. If any of the vagrants' family come calling, you guys, after Mr. A, naturally, will be the first to know. In the meantime, I have a customer to attend to. I just want to thank Mr. Grey42 for allowing me to narrate this story. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, and as always, stay tuned for one more nightmare.